Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
Is the Messi F50 League good enough, or should you spend nearly triple the price and go for the top-end elites? With the League tier being presented as the budget-friendly option, bearing a retail price of $95, which by modern football boot standards is actually pretty reasonable. The elites, however, aren't exactly for the budget-conscious, retailing for $270, which isn't the most expensive F50. That goes to the F50 Plus at $300, but it is an extra $10 over the normal F50 Elite. Both of which, by the way, you can pick up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. Both boots come in a box, the Elite one being a little fancier, and as far as extras go, you get nothing with the Leagues other than the boots themselves, while the Elites come with an extra set of comfort insoles along with a string bag. Not that that necessarily justifies the extra cost, but it is something. Aesthetically, at least from a distance, these two boots look very similar to each other, which I have to applaud Adidas for, because very often the sub $100 version, especially when you're talking about a pair of speed boots, just miss the mark in terms of having that kind of sleek, dare I say, fast look. But that is not the case with the League. Obviously, it doesn't have the external heel counter, and there are some extra details, especially the coloring in the sole plate, that isn't present on this particular colorway. But in general, I definitely don't think that the Leagues look bad. However, especially up close, there is far more detail and definitely more of a premium vibe about the Elites. When it comes to touch on the ball, again, these two boots are way more similar than you might expect, where obviously the top-end model features that hybrid touch material, which of course is specific to the Messi variant of the F50. It's part of why you pay that extra $10, and it gives this football boot not necessarily a padded leather-like sensation, but just a little bit more substance and certainly a little bit of extra softness that you don't get with the usual fiber touch synthetic of all the other F50 variants. You also get that sprint skin micro texture on the surface in the form of these zigzag lines that gives the upper a little bit more grittiness to the surface than I think a lot of people might realize, in turn resulting in actually quite a bit of extra grip on the ball without being overly sticky. If you like the speed boot feel and aesthetic but don't want an upper that is too thin, the Messi F50 Elite is a great choice. If you read the tech specs on the League version, however, you'll find that it's also technically made from hybrid touch, and in all honesty, it shares a lot in common with the Elites. It is maybe a smidge thicker, but arguably a little bit softer in terms of its overall feel, and you do miss out on that micro texturing of the sprint skin on the surface of the upper. This one is left pretty much completely smooth other than the textured Adidas stripes. But in terms of actual feel for the ball and generally the sensation of the upper, I honestly don't think that these are too far off the Elites, which is pretty crazy to say given the price discrepancy between these two. And very often one of my complaints when it comes to the more budget-friendly options, especially when you're talking about a pair of speed boots, is that they lose their identity as they get less and less expensive, meaning that if you're buying this League version expecting them to feel like the Elites, more often than not, that could not be further from reality. But in the case of these two, the Leagues come surprisingly close to the top-end model. I'm not going to say that they feel better, but I'd be lying if I said that they didn't come very close. Enjoying the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest content on the channel? Don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Something that does differ between these two uppers, though, is what's happening across the top of the foot, where on the top end Elite variation, I think one of the main appeals of this football boot is that custom burrito style tongue that previously was only available to Messi himself, but is finally an option on his current signature football boot. It's made from an elasticated prime knit with a little bit of fuse to prevent it from overstretching, and it's basically connected on the lateral side, wraps across the top of the foot, and then kind of tucks in on the medial side, meaning that the opening of this football boot is quite large, whereas the normal F50 Elite has more of like a one-piece enclosure in the sense that it's still a standalone tongue, but it has these little stirrups down the side that prevent it from moving around. It's kind of along the lines of the design you'll find on the League variation of the Messi F50, where this tongue is made from a padded neoprene material, and then as you can see, it is connected by way of stirrups on both the lateral and medial side as you get into the midfoot. So it's technically a standalone tongue, but you can't necessarily pull it up all that much. It has plenty of stretch to it, so putting the boots on and taking them off still feels quite good. And certainly from a comfort perspective, there's nothing to complain about here. This just has a little bit of extra padding to it that you don't get on the Elites. But if something about this Messi specific burrito style tongue has appeal to you, you are only going to get it on that top end model. Actually, that's not true. The pros also have this tongue. The heel area of these two boots is where you'll find some pretty significant design differences, although I'd argue they have more to do with feel than they do actual performance, where of course on the top end Elite, you are getting your structure from an external heel counter that's directly connected to the Sprint Frame 360 sole plate. There's not a lot of structure up top, which means that this has generally a softer feel in the heel area, and then the heel lining material is targeted foam lined in this really soft microfiber. I think in the speed boot category, this is one of the nicest heel designs currently on the market. Although I've also heard plenty of people in the comment section saying that they don't like the way this feels at all. So of course, your mileage may vary. Where the Leagues are obviously a lot more like what you'd expect to find in a pair of takedown models. There is what appears to be an external heel counter, but it's just some material stitched to the surface to give it that appearance. All your structure is internal, and generally the heel area is just much harder on the Elites and significantly bulkier. You'll notice that there's a lot more padding at the back as well as along the sides, and it is lined in what is admittedly a cheaper microfiber material, but one that is still adequately soft and generally fits quite well. So many Adidas takedown models have suffered from an overly shallow fit. This is definitely a little bit shallower than what you're going to find from the Elites, but overall still quite comfortable. The big difference is that I think the heel area of the F50s just feels a lot more sleek and streamlined versus the Leagues that certainly has that bulkier feel and look. What is a speed boot if it isn't light? And this is one of those areas where you're going to find some pretty significant separation between the cheap and expensive version of the Messi F50. Both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the League variant at $95, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.65 ounces, the equivalent of 245 grams. Remember those numbers, change the scale back, and we'll throw on the top end Elites at $270, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.1 ounces, the equivalent of 201 grams. Where I realize 45 grams doesn't sound like a lot, but it genuinely is the difference between being one of the lightest football boots on the market in the Elite variation and being kind of above average in terms of weight by modern football boot standards. Certainly not heavy, but the Elites are noticeably much lighter. With the main reason for that weight difference, given all the similarities that we've talked about so far, being the sole plate construction, where on the Elite model, obviously it's going to have a little bit more of that premium look. That doesn't necessarily make them heavier or lighter, though. You're going to find their Sprint Frame 360 sole plate, which again does incorporate that external heel counter as part of the mold, and it's effectively a variation of the Sprint Frame that we've been getting from the Adidas brand basically since 2010 with the original F50 Adizero. It's made from a lightweight plastic. You have some spining running through the midfoot into the heel for added structure, and the forefoot, despite being thin, still has that kind of responsive sensation you expect from a modern day speed boot. Where the Leagues feature what looks to be a very similar design, those same three spines running through the midfoot, but the plastic is actually a little bit thicker and a different material altogether that at the end of the day just weighs a little bit more. From a responsiveness standpoint, I don't want to say that it's flimsy by any means because that would be completely untrue, but it certainly doesn't feel quite as springy as what you're going to get from that top end model. For a sub $100 $100 football boot, I actually think the feel of this sole plate is quite good. But certainly if you're looking for that really impressive kind of speed boot underfoot feel, this isn't anywhere near as good as the Elites. What is, however, very similar between these two are the stud patterns, except they're not technically the same thing on paper, in that the top end Elite classifies this stud pattern as FG, meaning for use on firm natural grass, where on the leagues, this exact same stud pattern, even down to the stud length, is classified as FG MG, implying that you can use it on firm natural grass, but also on artificial playing surfaces. Why they've made that distinction, I'm not entirely sure. And obviously the performance is not going to differ between the two, given that they are exactly the same thing. But it is very important to note from a warranty perspective that if you wear the Elites with their FG stud pattern on artificial grass and they break prematurely, should you go and make a warranty claim, Adidas would be able to refuse it because you are wearing the boots on a playing surface they were not intended for. Not the case with the leagues. You can wear these on firm natural grass and you can wear them on artificial grass, and should something go wrong, Adidas should honor the warranty, no questions asked. I wish I had a better explanation as to why that difference exists, but I just don't. Where it must be said that even though they are saying you can wear the league variation on artificial grass, this is very much an FG stud pattern regardless of which version you go for. On firm natural grass, I think the traction is quite solid. You obviously get your 4 blades under the heel, and you get more of like a conical style stud for your main 4 studs in the forefoot, and then the ones closer to the tip have a little bit more of a bladed shaping to them. The same thing is exactly what you'll find on the cheaper league variation. So again, why Adidas is saying that this would be better for use on artificial grass than this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, other than the fact that this is definitely a thicker plastic sole plate that might hold up a little bit better on artificial grass. There's no question about that. But in terms of the traction provided, there really isn't a difference between these two. On feet, there is definitely a difference between these two, but how much of a difference the average person is going to notice, I would actually call into question. If you've always worn high-end speed boots, then I definitely think you will lean towards the Elites in terms of your overall preference. But I could definitely see plenty of people trying on both of these football boots and actually finding the leagues a little bit more comfortable. And the reason I say that is because the upper on the leagues, while very similar to the Elites, is slightly thicker and maybe a little bit more cushion, and that little bit of added softness, depending on the person, could result in them deciding that the leagues might feel a little bit more comfortable. The one thing I will say when comparing these two is that the sole plates are very noticeably different, where again, the Elites just feel a lot better. It feels like what you'd expect to get on a pair of top-end speed boots, but that is not to say that the sole plate on the leagues feel bad. It just feels more generic, I guess, for lack of a better word. From a fit and shaping perspective, again, I think Adidas have done an excellent job of not losing the identity of that top-end F50 with the more budget-friendly variation, in that the shaping, width, and volume does remain pretty similar. You do notice that the heel, like I said, is a little bit shallower and certainly more chunky on the leagues compared to the Elites, but again, that difference is relatively minor, and I don't think most people would even notice the change unless you had one on each foot. From a width and fit perspective, I do think these are going to work well for the vast majority of people. If you have extremely wide feet, like any pair of speed boots that are made from a synthetic material, these might not necessarily be the best option, but I do think they will work well for a wide variety of foot types. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So whether you're going league or Elite, I would strongly recommend going true to size. No matter which one you go for though, both of them are very comfortable. So in conclusion, if your main objective in getting a pair of Messi F50s is to have the best of the best, there is no question that spending the extra money on the Elites is worth it. They're a little bit slimmer, they're a little bit more sleek, there's a little bit of extra grip on the ball, and I would argue that they are noticeably lighter. In saying that though, other than definitely being noticeably lighter, the benefits that you get from the Elites are, like I said, only just a little bit when compared to the much less expensive leagues. Of course, given the choice myself, I would pick the Elites over the budget-friendly option, but for a sub $100 pair of football boots, if you're looking for that Messi F50 experience, these do a surprisingly good job.